The content in this video is based on factual, real-life events and public records. All opinions expressed are for educational and documentary purposes only. Viewer discretion is advised, as some scenes may depict sensitive content. This video is intended for informative purposes and complies with YouTube's guidelines. Prisons are meant to be places of justice. But what happens when the people in charge, the wardens, the guards, the administrators, are the ones breaking the law? Hidden within New York's prison walls, shocking abuses were swept under the rug. Whistleblowers and leaked reports reveal a world of violence, deception, and cover-ups, where inmates like Chad Stanbro paid the ultimate price. Tonight, we go behind the walls to expose the truth the authorities didn't want anyone to see. If you enjoy real, gripping prison documentaries and true stories, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with your friends and family. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss more shocking and exclusive content. Inside the walls, life and secrets of the prison system. Prisons are often portrayed as sterile institutions, designed to contain criminals safely. But behind the reinforced doors of New York's maximum security facilities, life for inmates tells a far darker story. Beyond the metal bars and barbed wire fences, the walls themselves seem to hold secrets, hidden incidents, falsified records, and abuses that the public never sees. For inmates, survival often depends not just on avoiding conflicts with fellow prisoners but on navigating the silent violence of those tasked with keeping order. The story of Chad Stanbro is a stark example of the risks hidden behind official reports. Stanbro, a young man incarcerated for a non-violent offense, was taken for a routine dental procedure. The procedure itself required sedation, a common practice in prisons to ensure safety. But what followed was a sequence of actions that would leave him paralyzed from the neck down. Guards, who were supposed to maintain security, instead restrained him aggressively. According to court records, they knelt on his neck until he lost movement entirely. But in the official report, there were no injuries. The discrepancy between lived reality and paperwork is the first hint of a broader pattern of misconduct within the system. Abuse in prisons often takes subtle forms: intimidation, verbal harassment, minor beatings, and unnecessary restraint. These actions, when documented, are frequently downplayed, disguised, or erased entirely. When prisoners try to report abuses, the retaliation can be swift: segregation, threats, or even falsified criminal charges. The prison environment becomes a microcosm of unaccountable power, where those at the top can manipulate records and escape scrutiny. Beyond New York, similar incidents have surfaced across the United States. In California, for instance, former Warden Ray J. Garcia was sentenced after being found guilty of sexually abusing incarcerated women and secretly photographing them in their cells. While each state has its own regulatory mechanisms, systemic failures often mean that perpetrators are protected while victims face obstacles in seeking justice. In this chapter, we explore the dual reality of prisons, one presented to the public, a place of discipline, rehabilitation, and justice, and one experienced by inmates, a world where fear, intimidation, and corruption define daily life. The revelations from leaked reports shed light on patterns of abuse that go unpunished, and how the prison system itself can shield the guilty under the guise of official procedure. The chilling truth is that cover-ups don't just hide wrongdoing, they perpetuate it. Guards and administrators who abuse power with impunity set a precedent, creating an environment where the rights of inmates are secondary to the protection of authority. Every falsified report, every intimidated witness, and every retaliated inmate strengthens a cycle of silence. The question becomes, if the people entrusted with maintaining justice are themselves criminals, can the system ever truly serve justice? The hidden brutality, excessive force, and false records. In New York's prison system, excessive force by corrections officers is not an anomaly, it is a recurring problem. What separates these incidents from public awareness is the systematic falsification of records. Reports of violence are often rewritten, downplayed, or erased entirely. The case of Chad Stanbro demonstrates the terrifying consequences of this practice. Stanbro's experience highlights a chain of events that often goes unnoticed. Inmates sedated for routine medical procedures are vulnerable. Guards, instead of ensuring safety, sometimes respond with disproportionate violence. In Stanbro's case, the restraint that left him paralyzed was described officially as an uneventful interaction. Investigators later revealed that officers involved systematically misreported the use of force and intentionally misrepresented injuries. But the falsification of reports is just one layer of a deeper problem. Interviews with former guards, whistleblowers, and investigative journalists reveal patterns: staff intimidation, alteration of incident logs, and removal of video footage. Even when complaints are made by inmates or family members, internal investigations frequently conclude without accountability. The result is a culture in which misconduct is normalized and protected. Prisoners with visible signs of criminal identity, like tattoos indicating gang affiliation, are often at higher risk. Some guards use gang associations as a pretext for targeting individuals. Falsified reports allow the institution to justify actions as necessary discipline, masking the underlying abuse. The legal system often depends on these reports to determine culpability, meaning falsification can obstruct justice entirely. Historical comparisons show that these issues are not isolated. Across the United States, federal and state investigations have uncovered patterns of unreported or misreported brutality. These include use of chemical agents, prolonged restraint, denial of medical care, and sexual abuse. Each incident contributes to a broader perception that prisons, rather than being rehabilitative institutions, can function as instruments of covert violence when oversight fails. The implications are profound. Families of victims like Stanbro are left with trauma, financial burdens, and frustration as they navigate a system designed to protect those responsible for harm. Beyond individual cases, the broader social contract is violated. Prisons exist to enforce the law impartially, but when administrators subvert this principle, the entire justice system's credibility is compromised. Whistleblowers and the leaked truth. Exposing the system, 2,000 words. Prisons are designed to be opaque institutions, fortified with walls, barbed wire, and guards. Yet despite their layers of security, the truth often finds a way to escape through cracks in the system. Whistleblowers, brave individuals willing to risk their careers, safety, and reputations, have repeatedly emerged as the only line between systematic abuse and public awareness. In New York's prison system, leaked internal reports and testimonies from former staff members have exposed a culture that many believed was untouchable. The concept of whistleblowing is simple but dangerous. Someone inside the institution observes wrongdoing and decides to report it, often to journalists, advocacy groups, or legal authorities. In the prison system, the stakes are particularly high. Guards and administrators are not only part of a hierarchical system, they often operate with considerable autonomy and limited oversight. Reporting abuse can lead to threats, reassignment to dangerous units, or even falsified accusations aimed at discrediting the whistleblower. Yet, despite these risks, some choose to come forward. Alvarez secretly collected internal logs, incident reports, and email communications between staff and administrators. In these documents, patterns of intimidation, retaliation, and cover-ups became clear. One report outlined an inmate being sedated for medical treatment and then physically restrained, with injuries recorded only as minor abrasions. Other emails between administrators discussed how to frame incidents to protect the facility's public image, instructing officers to stick to the narrative and minimize exposure. When Alvarez approached supervisors about the abuses, he was met with hostility. His reports were ignored, and he was threatened with termination. Nevertheless, he provided the evidence to a non-profit investigative outlet, which began a months-long review of hundreds of documents. The findings were damning. The investigation uncovered repeated instances of excessive force, falsification of medical records, and intimidation of both inmates and staff who raised concerns. The narrative presented to the public, a well-ordered, disciplined, and safe prison, was, in reality, a carefully constructed illusion. The impact of these leaks was immediate. Families of inmates were shocked to learn the extent of hidden abuses. Advocacy groups demanded accountability, and state authorities initiated inquiries. However, the revelations also highlighted a deeper, more systemic issue. Prisons can operate as self-contained ecosystems where the people in charge control the flow of information. When oversight mechanisms are weak, abuses persist, and cover-ups become routine. Leaked reports also revealed the psychological tactics used to maintain control. Guards were trained to assert dominance over inmates, often using fear, humiliation, and intimidation. Inmates who resisted or questioned authority were labeled problematic or uncooperative, justifying further punishment. These tactics were sometimes codified in internal memos, instructions disguised as policy. For example, a memo might advise officers to use appropriate control techniques without clarifying what counted as excessive. In practice, this vagueness allowed staff to engage in physical abuse while avoiding accountability. One of the most notorious cases came from a women's prison in California. Former Warden Ray J. Garcia was convicted of sexual abuse and secretly photographing inmates. While Garcia's case is geographically separate, it underscores a universal truth about prisons. When those in authority are unmonitored or unaccountable, power can be exploited, often in horrific ways. For whistleblowers and investigative journalists, the challenge is exposing such misconduct before it becomes normalized. In the case of Chad Stanbro, whistleblower evidence directly contributed to legal action against the officers involved. Court testimony drew upon internal emails and incident reports that Alvarez and others had preserved. This documentation contradicted the official narrative, revealing deliberate attempts to obscure injuries, misrepresent events, and shield perpetrators. Stanbro's paralysis was no accident. It was a consequence of a system where oversight was weak and documentation was manipulated. Documentary investigations based on leaked reports also have a broader social function. They challenge assumptions about the justice system. For a global audience, prisons are often seen as a reflection of societal order. Exposing cover-ups, abuse, and systemic negligence shatters that perception, prompting crucial questions. Can justice exist in a system that shields its own employees from accountability? How much trust should the public place in institutions designed to control human behavior? In addition to internal reports, surveillance footage has played a critical role in exposing wrongdoing. Modern prisons are equipped with cameras, yet footage is frequently withheld, edited, or selectively presented. Whistleblowers have sometimes obtained these recordings, revealing the stark contrast between recorded events and official reports. A hand pressing on a camera control panel, a guard manipulating footage timestamps. These small actions illuminate the lengths institutions will go to maintain their narrative. The consequences of exposure are profound. Some prisons have undergone federal investigations, resulting in policy revisions, staff suspensions, or criminal charges. However, change is uneven, often limited to high-profile cases. In less publicized facilities, systemic abuses persist, shielded from scrutiny by opaque reporting structures and hierarchical power. This highlights a critical tension in modern prisons: transparency versus control. Ultimately, Chapter 3 underscores a central truth. Without whistleblowers, abuses behind prison walls would remain largely invisible. Their courage, combined with investigative journalism, forces institutions to confront uncomfortable realities. The leaked reports reveal not just the failings of individual guards or administrators, but the systemic mechanisms that perpetuate abuse, protect perpetrators, and silence victims. The fight for transparency is ongoing. Legal systems, advocacy groups, and concerned citizens continue to press for stronger oversight, mandatory reporting standards, and independent monitoring. Yet, the stories exposed by whistleblowers remind us that the battle against corruption and abuse is never fully won. Every leaked report, every testimony, every documented injustice contributes to a broader understanding of what prisons can and should be. The warden's web, power, corruption, and a culture of silence. Prisons are structured around a strict chain of command. At the top of that chain sits the warden, a figure often portrayed as disciplined, authoritative, and committed to maintaining order. But leaked reports and whistleblower testimonies from multiple U.S. prisons reveal a darker truth. When a warden chooses abuse over accountability, the entire system beneath them becomes contaminated. In New York, California, and several other states, wardens have played a central role in creating, maintaining, and protecting a culture where corruption thrives and truth is suffocated. To understand this dynamic, we look first at the environment wardens operate in. They have unmatched power inside the facility. They oversee staff hiring, policy enforcement, discipline, daily operations, and the handling of all internal investigations. The warden decides which incidents escalate to state authorities, which complaints get dismissed, and which officers are shielded from consequences. This level of control becomes dangerous when combined with a lack of external oversight. One of the clearest examples of abuse at the highest level occurred in California, where former warden Ray J. Garcia was found guilty of sexually abusing incarcerated women. Garcia's crimes were not isolated moments of weakness. They were the result of years of unchecked authority. He used his position to access areas where inmates were most vulnerable, to intimidate them into silence, and to manipulate documentation so that his actions vanished from official records. Investigators later discovered secret photographs he had taken inside cell blocks, images meant to degrade and control. His actions highlight a painful truth. When leaders deviate from ethics, the entire foundation of the institution begins to rot. New York's own leaked reports painted a similar portrait. Though no single warden was publicly convicted in this particular review, the internal documents showed clear patterns: wardens receiving complaints but failing to act, approving falsified incident records, and instructing officers to control the narrative during investigations. One memo, leaked anonymously, revealed a directive from a high-ranking administrator advising guards to support each other's statements after an incident involving excessive force. Such coded language sends a message: protect the institution, even if it means burying the truth. This culture filters downward. Guards who follow the unspoken rules, downplaying injuries, intimidating inmates, rewriting reports, are rewarded with favorable shifts, promotions, or preferential treatment. Meanwhile, those who question unethical practices are isolated, reassigned to dangerous units, or threatened with termination. The warden's silence becomes approval. Their refusal to enforce accountability becomes a signal to staff that misconduct is tolerated, even expected. Inside these environments, inmates face impossible choices. If they report abuse, they risk retaliation, solitary confinement, fabricated disciplinary charges, or targeted harassment. When the people entrusted with protecting them are the very ones orchestrating the abuse, fear becomes a defining emotion of prison life. Interviews with former inmates revealed a chilling pattern. Many believed that filing complaints was more dangerous than remaining silent. They learned quickly that the system was not designed to protect them. It was designed to protect itself. But the warden's influence extends beyond daily operations. When scandals begin to surface, when families complain, or when journalists attempt to inquire, the warden becomes the institution's shield. Public statements are crafted carefully to downplay concerns. External investigations are stalled by missing paperwork, lost video recordings, or administrative errors. Every tactic serves one purpose: maintaining the illusion of control. And yet, no cover-up is perfect. Time, persistence, and the bravery of whistleblowers eventually reveal the cracks. In New York, the accumulation of leaked reports, incident logs, internal emails, testimony from former staff exposed how widespread the corruption was. Certain wardens had signed off on injury-free incident reports that contradicted medical files. Others had approved solitary confinement placements that violated state rules. These discoveries painted a devastating picture. The warden's office, meant to serve as a pillar of justice, had become a control center for manipulation. This systemic failure forces a difficult question: how many more abuses remain buried simply because there was no whistleblower, no leaked report, no journalist willing to investigate? For every documented case, countless others may have never left the prison walls. The warden's power allows them to decide what reaches the outside world. And when self-preservation becomes the priority, transparency becomes the enemy. To the outside audience, especially viewers in the United States, Canada, and Europe, this reality is hard to accept. Prisons are expected to operate under strict regulations, oversight committees, and civil rights protections. But real oversight only works when leaders do not interfere with the truth. When a warden manipulates the system to hide wrongdoing, accountability becomes almost impossible. What makes the culture of corruption so resilient is its deep-rooted nature. It is not built in a day. It develops over years, through silence, fear, intimidation, and the normalization of misconduct. Guards begin to believe that falsifying a report is helping the team. Administrators convince themselves that avoiding bad publicity is protecting public trust. The warden tells themselves they are maintaining order. But in reality, the institution becomes a place where justice is twisted and human lives are disposable. Still, the exposure of these abuses is not without impact. In facilities where wardens were removed, investigations launched, and whistleblower testimony verified, gradual improvements have begun. States have started implementing independent monitoring programs, increasing body camera usage, and enforcing stricter documentation standards. Yet, progress remains uneven. Many prisons operate in shadows, untouched by reform. The warden's role is central in shaping whether a prison protects or destroys its population. When that role is corrupted, the institution becomes a danger to itself and to society. Chapter 4 exposes this dangerous truth. Corruption does not start with one officer. It starts at the top. Until systems are built to hold wardens fully accountable, the cycle of abuse, cover-ups, and manipulation will repeat. And the stories uncovered in leaked reports will only represent a small fraction of what truly happens behind the walls. Breaking the silence. The fight for accountability and the future of prison reform. Reform never begins with the system itself. It begins with pressure, from families demanding answers, from journalists refusing to stop digging, from advocacy groups pushing lawsuits, and from whistleblowers who refuse to stay silent. In the wake of the leaked reports from New York and the nationwide scandals exposing abusive wardens and corrupt correctional officers, the fight for accountability entered a new phase. The public could no longer look away. The walls that once hid decades of abuse were starting to crack. For decades, prisons operated with near total autonomy. Internal affairs departments were understaffed. Investigations were often conducted by colleagues of the very officers accused of misconduct, and inmate complaints were dismissed long before reaching outside agencies. The leaked documents changed that dynamic. Suddenly, state officials had evidence, real documents, signatures, timestamps, and testimonies that contradicted official statements. The public learned that no injuries didn't always mean no injuries. They learned that silence within a prison system often meant fear, manipulation, or retaliation. In New York, the exposure led to the reopening of several previously dismissed cases involving excessive force. Civil rights lawyers demanded independent investigations rather than relying on internal prison reviews. Families who had once been told their loved ones fell in the shower or resisted restraint began to file wrongful death and abuse lawsuits, many of which revealed deeper patterns of institutional neglect. The voice of the inmate, once dismissed as unreliable, was suddenly backed by leaked emails, falsified documents, and whistleblower accounts that proved their stories were not just plausible, but true. Beyond New York, the ripples reached other states. California strengthened oversight of its women's prisons following the conviction of Ray J. Garcia, acknowledging the system's long-standing failure to protect vulnerable inmates. In states like Michigan, Texas, and Florida, advocacy groups called for mandatory body cameras in all correctional facilities and unrestricted access to footage. Some prisons were forced to implement digital tracking systems for use of force incidents, preventing officers from retroactively editing or destroying reports. Still, reform is slow. Prisons are massive institutions built on decades of entrenched culture. Changing paperwork procedures does not automatically break the silence. Passing oversight laws does not automatically stop intimidation. True reform requires a complete shift in accountability, from the ground level all the way up to the warden's office. And that shift only happens when the public continues to pay attention. One of the most significant obstacles to reform is the normalization of abuse inside prisons. Many officers begin their careers with good intentions, only to be pulled into a system where silence is rewarded and speaking out is punished. A guard who witnesses excessive force may fear retaliation. A lieutenant who sees falsification of reports may believe reporting it will end their career. Even wardens with integrity may feel pressured by political forces to protect the institution rather than expose its failures. This cycle of silence is why leaked documents and whistleblowers remain some of the most powerful tools of accountability. As more undercover footage, internal audits, and whistleblower testimonies reached the public over the last decade, prison reform organizations expanded their advocacy. They pushed for legislation requiring independent inspectors general for all state prison systems, officials who operate outside the chain of command and can investigate misconduct without interference. They also advocated for stronger legal protections for whistleblowers inside correctional facilities, ensuring that officers who report abuse cannot be fired, demoted, or placed in dangerous assignments. Technology also became part of the reform effort. Advocacy groups used digital platforms to gather anonymous complaints from inmates and staff, creating data maps of abuse patterns. Families, once voiceless, now recorded phone calls, documented injuries, and submitted evidence to outside investigators. The information gap that once allowed wardens to control the narrative began to shrink. But the fight is far from over. Many prisons still operate with limited transparency. Footage disappears. Reports are altered. Inmates who speak out are isolated. And reform efforts often face pushback from powerful correctional unions that argue oversight threatens officer safety. These conflicts reveal the deeper question at the heart of prison reform. How do you change a system that is designed to hide itself? The answer is not simple, but it begins with exposure. Every leaked report matters. Every whistleblower matters. Every journalist who reads between the lines matters. Every family demanding the truth matters. And every documentary, like the one this story builds toward, helps break the silence that prisons depend on. What the public must understand is this: abuse inside prisons does not stay inside prisons. It shapes communities, influences recidivism, affects mental health, destroys families, and erodes trust in the justice system. A prison system that hides abuse ultimately creates more crime, not less. And a justice system that tolerates corruption loses its moral foundation. The hope for the future lies in transparency. Independent monitors with unrestricted access. Cameras that cannot be turned off. Policies that punish retaliation. Training focused on de-escalation rather than domination. Public oversight committees made up not only of officials, but of citizens and formerly incarcerated individuals. Reform is not about weakening prisons. It is about strengthening justice. The fight for accountability is long, difficult, and often dangerous. But every story exposed, every cover-up dismantled, and every corrupt official held accountable brings society one step closer to a system worthy of the word justice. In the end, the walls may be high, but the truth can climb higher. Inside every prison wall, there are stories the world was never meant to hear. Stories rewritten, buried, or silenced by those in power. But truth has a way of escaping. Through leaked reports, through whistleblowers, through the courage of those who refuse to look away. This investigation exposed more than abuse. It revealed a system built to protect itself, even at the cost of human lives. Yet it also showed the power of resistance. The officers who spoke out, the inmates who survived, the families who demanded justice, and the activists who fought to bring the truth to light. Reform is not a destination. It is a fight, one that continues every day behind the bars, in the courts, in the streets, and in the voices of those who refuse to be silent. Because in the end, accountability is not just about prisons. It's about who we are as a society, and whether justice inside the walls can ever reflect justice outside them. The story doesn't end here, but the silence, that ends now.